Hey everyone, I'm very excited to bring back a multi-time guest of Visible and friend of ours, Jonah Midanik. Jonah is the managing partner at Forum Ventures, also the co-founder of the Forum AI Studio. For those of you that are not familiar with Forum, they're one of the leading early stage SaaS funds, programs, and communities really focused on B2B SaaS. Over $100 million in AUM, over 400 portfolio companies at this point. And Forum prides themselves on partnering with founders at the earliest stages, even just from idea to seed, but also hands-on support with product development, go-to-market, fundraising, and all things leadership. Just a great firm and friend of ours. But Jonah, thanks for joining us.
Yeah, pleasure to be here. Thanks for having me.
Is SaaS dead, or is that just like a thing people like to say?
So I think SaaS is evolving and the business model is changing slightly. But I think ultimately a lot of these conversations are fairly semantic. So the way Forum thinks about it is businesses are going to continue to buy software. And whether that's build monthly or build monthly plus usage, it's all kind of semantic. If you actually think about, pick arguably the best, most successful sales SaaS company of all time, Salesforce. Salesforce already bills on usage, how many contacts you have, how many seats you have. So when it moves to agents or other AI models and you're paying even more for usage, that's actually not really different than it is now. So I think it's a little bit of like meet the new boss, same as the old boss. Companies are going to continue to buy software. They're going to continue to pay for it monthly, whether that's called SaaS or agents or whatever. It's ultimately more of the same as far as I'm
That
concerned.
was that was a curveball, but I was reading last night, late last night, just all these different takes about SaaS and AI. I figured you had a pretty good pulse on it. We've experimented with it at Visible as well in terms of like usage based, and I'd be curious to get your thoughts. But it feels like the buyer still, depending on the buyer, is like more comfortable with like knowing how much will I pay this month or this year, and somewhat weary still of like usage based, at least from what we've seen. I don't know if you guys have seen something similar.
No, that's across the board. I mean, buyers want to know cost certainty, right? You let usage run wild in your company, and all of a sudden you get a bill 10x what you budgeted. No one really wants that, and they want costs to be tied to outcomes. So, like, Visible is, obviously wildly valuable, but if you're a startup founder or someone like Forum that uses it, you would want to know how much you're paying for all the value it creates so you can make a buying decision.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Thanks for that little offshoot to get us started here. But really, what we're going to kind of focus on today is kind of the earliest stages for founders, think about their fundraising, their story, their journey. Forum, you guys have put first money into hundreds of SaaS companies at this point. Um, when you're the first check into a company that's already got a product or team in place, what signals are you looking for, especially for founders that are like first time founders raising for the first time? Is it market knowledge? Is it the narrative of the founder? Is it traction? Like how do those inputs work with your decision to invest in a company or not?
Yeah, that's a great question. So, first of all, because of where Forum sits in the stack, we're like true first check in investors. So, we are almost always going it alone as the only VC. We're quite often pre revenue, sometimes even pre product. And so, ultimately, we're betting on basically just two things. First and foremost, we're betting on the founder. And so that's a lot of forms it can take. It can be they're wildly ambitious. It can be they've got a great insight. It can be they're kind of magic in the room. It can be any combination of things. But ultimately, we're betting on an individual and their ability to evolve as the business evolves. Because as you well know as a founder, your job this quarter is going to be different than your job next quarter. And we're really trying to look ahead and saying, are you going to be able to meet the moment quarter after quarter after quarter after quarter, which is, is quite hard. The second thing we're looking for is a market that can be venture scale. There's a million great businesses out there. Lots of them are just not venture scale. And I define venture scale for Forum as being like, is there potential to get to $100 million in annual revenue? And a lot of businesses out there just are unbelievable businesses. In fact, most of the wealthiest people I know do not own $100 million revenue businesses. So a venture scale market with a great person at the helm or people at the helm is kind of the magic formula, and what that means can vary pretty wildly.
The $100 million market's interesting. I think that's been like a benchmark for a while. Do you see that? that test is even getting higher now in terms of like revenue, or is that still kind of your benchmark? Like, can this get?
So for some of the bigger funds, I do think that benchmark is getting higher. For Forum, it's not for one pretty simple reason, which is a lot of companies are just a lot more capital efficient than they used to be. So it used to be to get to $100 million in revenue, you'd get on what I call the alphabet treadmill. So you do like seed A, B, C, D, E. And now we're seeing a ton of companies skip one or many of those rounds. And so what that means as a founder is you're taking in less money, you're diluting less. What that means for Forum is you're diluting less. So for us to get to a very large outcome, we'll own more at the end than we used to because founders are just taking in less money, unless you're doing something incredibly capital efficient, capital intensive that requires a ton. So I would say that what we are hearing is for some of the big guys, they need the bar to go up because they need very large outcomes, and the big funds are raising these massive funds, and they just need to move $1 billion fund, you need like a $10 billion acquisition, and $100 million doesn't get that done. For Forum, where our funds are much closer to like the 30 to $50 million range, $100 million outcome is still a massive, massive revenue outcome for us, and we'll probably own more at the end now than we would have, even 3 years ago. So hasn't changed for us, but we are seeing the market shift a bit.
You how do any other thoughts on how you see the market shift? Like, it sounds like maybe companies raising less money, being more capital efficient, which is interesting if funds are getting larger at the same time. Like, do you see any like long-term ways companies are going to be financed or bought change?
Yeah, I do think that there is going to be a pretty significant change in the way startups are funded. I think there's going to be a lot of funds still like Forum, smaller funds who are, you know, doing pre-seed and seed, and then there's the multi-stage funds like your General Catalysts and your Insights and your Andreessens that are raising billions and billions and billions of dollars and need to put that money to work. I think the messy middle is starting to go away. We're seeing funds start to close their doors. A lot of those, middle stage, like three, four, $500 million funds are just going away. They're finding it difficult to raise capital. They're finding it difficult to return capital. Um, and so you're going to have this bifurcation, I think, where there's going to be these like capital intensive businesses that are funded by your Andreessens, and you're going to have a lot of software businesses that are funded by smaller funds, and maybe they get onto that larger treadmill, but maybe they just raise a couple rounds of financing and try to become profitable. I think founders have increasingly understood that profitability is a pretty magic thing. It really puts you in control of your own destiny. So we're starting to see, as financing gets harder and building a company becomes less people intensive, um, that's the direction I
Hmm.
think the market might head.
Yeah, that's interesting. And then they get bought by one of the big funds too, right? It seems like that's the direction too, where a lot of these larger funds are becoming RIAs. I think General Catalyst owns a hospital, so it's
Yep.
interesting to see how they're putting that money to work as well. Um,
Yeah, absolutely.
kind of talking about fundraising and some strategies where you might only raise a few rounds. You work with founders, like you said, in the earliest kind of inception. Uh, how does the approach evolve, and what are the gaps founders need to go through when it comes to fundraising, from evolving from like a pre-seed to like a larger round? Like, any common moments where founders really get how like fundraising works and like gaps they need to fill in their own toolkit?
Yeah, I think there's a pretty big evolution. So at pre-seed, it is you are largely selling yourself and the story. There's not a lot of proof points yet, right? You maybe have a fully baked product, but probably you don't. Maybe you've got a couple customers, but they're still probably like pilot stage or they're small. You're really selling yourself in a dream. And that's why when people say story is really important, that is the stage at which story is most important. And then as you start to migrate into the larger and later rounds, whether it's seed or A, story is still important. You need to tell the story of how this market's going to grow and what you might look like as a venture scale business. But the proof points become increasingly important. So things like customer love, which is really what people are wanting to see now in these AI businesses, because getting
Mm.
traction is actually reasonably easy, but getting people who stay on your product is harder. And I think what we see a lot of is founders who successfully raise the pre-seed round go out for the seed round, and for those first few meetings, they really anchored a story, which is important. But those investors are more like, "Well, tell me how these customers are using it. Tell me about retention. Tell me about success metrics from your customers." And they go, "Oh, I actually need to mix in a lot more of not what might happen, but what is happening." And it's Series A now, where Series A's are going off increasingly closer to like $3 million in revenue. You need to start to show like we have a repeatable sales motion. Here is what metrics look like. Here is how we're going to evolve. Here is where the platform play is. And so I do think there's those big beats. And having gone through it personally and having shepherded hundreds of companies through it at this point, yeah, everyone kind of figures it out when they go back out there.
So where do you spend a lot of your time going through and supporting your founders that come through at Forum? Is that through like the outreach piece and helping companies find the right investors? Is that helping you tailor the traction story now that that's an important part of the process? Like where do you spend a lot of your time supporting?
Yeah, so we spend our time kind of from end to end.
Yeah.
So we're there from the beginning of doing the research on which funds are the right funds, to how you outreach to them, to how you build your list, to how you track, to listening to recordings of meetings, to building deck and story, to building data room, to getting the panic text at 10 o'clock at night. This VC says this. What do I do now? Something's in your inbox. Literally, kind of being behind a founder every step of the way. Because definitionally, running an accelerator in a studio, most of these founders have not fundraised before. And as you know, if you haven't done it, there's no real analog to doing it.
Hmm.
It's its own thing. And I think supporting people on every step of that path is really important.
Do you have like a playbook or process you like to recommend to those founders? Like because it is like you said, it is like a new thing. What's the framework or approach you try to instill in founders with the process?
Yeah, so we're pretty productized, so we've got pretty every step of the journey kind of mapped out. Like we recommend ensuring that you get some high quality tooling like a Visible and make sure you do your research on founders, get a good list. We make sure that that is very well tracked because at the end of the day, this is it's a sales process. The thing you are selling is equity in your business, but it's a sales process.
Yeah.
And just like we would with any sales process, you have to research the customer, which in this case is VCs. You have to ensure you've got, a narrative match to that customer. You have to ensure that you're tracking it. You have to ensure that you're following up. You have to, and so for every step of that process, we have both, some best practices and tools. And it's not always one size fits all. Like some founders we say use a deck, some founders we say just have a conversation. It really depends on how good you are. But then there's some core things that always need to be true. You need a high quality data source, you need a great way of tracking, you need a way that we can look through and see what you're doing. You need, VCs still value things like speed and story, and so there's some universal truths there as well. And I think the art and science of it is taking, the best practices and best tooling and then mixing it with the founder strengths and market and what the market's wanting right now to come up with the answer.
Yeah, I love that. When those founders are building that target list you mentioned of potential investors, what do you find matters more? Is it like the firm, alignment and thesis? Is it the individual partner's background or something else entirely?
I think it's a mix of both, right? So like you need the firm needs to be aligned. If the firm has never, pulled the trigger on manufacturing play, then they're probably not going to. But at the end of the day, you are partnering with a partner, right? Like that person's likely going to be on your board. That person's going to be the person you're calling. Um, and if you have a great partner at a lesser known firm, that can make a huge difference. Whereas if you have, a partner at a bigger firm, but then they, as an example, like spin out into their own firm and then you no longer have them, like that can be highly negative. So I think at the end of the day, venture is a people business. And the name on the door matters actually a lot less than people would think. The feedback I get from most founders is It's the person, which makes sense. I mean, an organization isn't going to do all that much for you. It's the person at the other end of the Zoom or phone.
How do you see that's kind of our entire theme of this season of our podcast is thrive through connection and relationships and how that all unfolds in the story of AI. How do you see venture? You said because you said it is like a people business at the end of the day, which we totally believe. Like, how do you see venture interplaying with AI and all of this like new world of uh, capital efficient businesses, relationships matter, later stage, massive funds. Like, how does AI interplay in all of this?
So I think it just accelerates everything I'm saying, right? So even at Forum, there's a huge amount of things that used to be done by AI, used to be done by people that are now done by AI, right? A lot of our sourcing, a lot of our evaluation. But at the end of the day, the decision is made by people and the relationship is between people. And if anything, I would say those things are more important than they've ever been because the rest is so commoditized. I mean, getting a competitive analysis done on a business is a prompt chain at this point. Anyone can do that. I don't You don't need a brilliant analyst, like it's pretty open sourced. And so ultimately you're trying to decide on a founder and like a network. And I think those things are ever more important because everything else is going to be commoditized to be basically equal.
Hmm. Yeah. What about if we're doing this faster? Has the timeline shifted at all for raising capital? Is it slower than it used to be, faster than it used to be, kind of the same? Like, have you seen timeline change at all with some of these new tooling with AI?
So I think two things are happening. One, it's faster to, let's say, code an MVP. It's faster to do outreach using AI. It's faster to, all of those things are faster. But there's less funds that are deploying capital and they're deploying it at a higher bar. So when you add in the it's faster to do things, but it takes longer and there's less funds, the timing doesn't feel all that different than it did, a year and a half ago. Um, there are some things that still get really hot and frothy, and I think that's always been the case in venture, so that too feels constant.
Mm.
So even though the ground truth is shifting pretty dramatically, I would say we're not really seeing outcomes shift all that dramatically. Just the how you get there is different
Yeah,
because people want to see, like, before they give you a bunch of money, they want to see that you can build a product. And with Cursor and Windsurf and all of those things, you should be able to just so much more easily than you were previously.
yeah, it's crazy. The bar is continues to be lower and lower and lower in terms of how hard it is to get your initial product out the door. Kind of shifting over now to this kind of second part of our convo, kind of teed up like the getting ready for the race, now like the deck and storytelling itself. Um, I think you hear all the time like story matters. You need a great story. I'm curious, like, does it actually move the needle? So, like, have you thought of a moment where you helped refine a founder's story that led to more interest than before? Like the race, right? So it's like, yeah, we worked on the story, kind of shaped a better version of the story, ultimately led to a better outcome of like funding or investor interest.
Yeah, I continue to think it's one of the most important things. So, one of the things founders don't often see, and we get this a lot running an accelerator, right? Founders will pitch us their product, which is usually like a wedge, right? They've only been around for 6 months. It's not this huge platform. And their wedge has some value, but it's hard to imagine a world changing business in this little wedge. And so we have to extrapolate that out for ourselves. Like, oh, what does this mean if you have
Mhm.
this wedge? What would this mean if you could aggregate a ton of these customers? What is the next step of this? Uh, Being able to clearly communicate that is so wildly important. I don't think most founders realize, like, here's a little peek behind the curtain. When I get off a Zoom with a founder and then I go talk to my partners and they say, what does that person do? They want the 2 to 3 sentences about what the venture scale idea is. And if you can't clearly communicate it to a founder, then that's kind of the starting point for any conversation within most funds that I know. And so nailing that 2 to 3 sentences is in a great many way the ball game. It's a necessary condition for success.
How much does that factor in of like you want to hear that from the founder direct? versus you coaching that founder and getting them to that point, right? I'm sure there's somewhere in the middle, but like I'm curious, like how much you want the founder to come to you with that 2 to 3 sentence soundbite versus you helping shape that over the course of the accelerator or your time working with them.
So at our accelerator, we typically are dealing with first time founders or first time tech founders. And so they don't typically have that, and that's okay. Our job is to see past the pitch, right? And to form a partnership with that founder. And what we want to know is it actually in there? Like any great
Mm-hmm.
statue, you're looking at the block and the artist and saying, can this person build this beautiful piece? And so that's our job. It was our seed fund, then we would want you to be at that point. You should have been able to communicate that. So it just depends where we meet you on the journey. But if you're through the accelerator, yeah, I want to see that it's there. But I view that as my job in a great many ways, or myself and my partner's job to like, kind of hold our hands and guide us. And I actually went through Forum's accelerator as a founder. And so I know what I went in pitching versus what I went out pitching,
Yeah.
when I raised capital from a lot of great funds. And those were wildly different things.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. What's the so you've gone through this before? You know, coach founders. Like, what's the number one mistake you see founders make with like? Let's just talk about the pitch deck in particular. That asset. Like, what's the number one mistake you see when people come to you in your team?
So this is one of my pet peeves. Founders treat pitch decks like a collection of slides. And that's not how humans communicate. If you actually think about like how you in your regular life, even just like how we started this podcast talking about our families, we're just talking. People think in stories and relationships, and Mike, you at Visible have always believed in
Yeah.
that, and that's a big thing that you guys have done and do. But that is how humans work. And so when you take a template and you're like, slide one is problem, slide two is like, maybe that's the best way to communicate your story, but probably it isn't. And by that I mean the best way to communicate your story is put down a PowerPoint or a Google Drive or a Canva or whatever tool, it doesn't matter. And actually, just in 90 seconds, how would you explain this business opportunity to someone who has no context?
Yep.
And you need to explain the way the world's going to be different because of the problem you're solving and your unique ability to solve it. And unless and until you can do that in 90 seconds to a normal person in plain English, your deck is going to be bad because it slides. And so start with a story that you can tell and then put slides against it. But founders sit and they're like, the YC template. And YCs, they're very good at what they do. And the YC template, once you have that story, makes a lot of sense. Without that story, it's a collection of slides that is disjointed, boring. And the other thing is, founders have to realize like at the other end of the Zoom is this person who has their email up and their Slack and have heard 10 of these today. And if it's boring, they're going to do what people do when they're bored and they have other things to look at, which is they're going to look at other stuff because there's a human at the other end of this. And so you've got to interest us in a story because we're humans. We used to say, well, my first business, I bootstrapped and sold an advertising agency. And we used to always say that, our buyers were consumers too. Well, like VCs are humans too, and they love a great story. I mean, find me a person who doesn't love a great story. No such person exists. And so that's my big one is get off their slide deck, tell the story first, and then write the deck after, and everything will be literally 5x better by that one simple change.
I love that. Thank you. I think for one of the first times we chatted, you kind of like unlocked a aha moment with me that I have since repeated to a lot of other people in my life, in other founders and just people, which is like lead with your strength. Because I think online or you're online consuming all of this knowledge from founders, investors, operators, and it's like, oh, this is how I did it, right? And you kind of put that in your brain, like, oh, I'm going to go copy that, which might not be your strength. because I feel questions all the time from founders. It's like, oh, should I do this, and I'm like, well, what's your strength? And that like unlocked like aha moment for me that I've carried with me for a while. So thank you for that. But can you just give a little bit more airtime to like lead with your strength? I think it's such a key uh, learning for me of like leading with strength and confidence, because that kind of comes through.
Yeah, so I think that there's it's cliche, right? But you and I are both parents. It's like be yourself. There's 8 billion other people, and so it's not going to be authentic. It's not going to resonate. It's going to be a story, but it's not going to be your story. And so leading with strength means what's the thing that you're great at, or what's the thing that your business is great at. So when I was fundraising for my company, was founder CEO 10 years ago with a MarTech business, and everyone hated marketing technology. They used to, I guess they still do. No one likes MarTech, right? And so I had to find a way to not be like, the problem I'm solving is marketers have this data problem, which was like, cool. Like everyone was saying that. It's not interesting. It's very undifferentiated. And so what I did was I was like, you know what I do have actually? I've got like 10 of the world's biggest enterprises paying me money every month. And so my first slide, which you will never see a pitch deck template that's like, your first slide should just be a bunch of logos for a seed deck. No one ever does that. But I was like, I'm just going to be like, the following people pay me monthly: Scotiabank, BMW, Porsche, like these huge, massive brands. And then the last line was, and I've never lost a customer.
Hmm.
And then the next slide was why. And then I went into problem. And immediately I got meetings everywhere. I remember walking into like Sequoia and Andreessen and all of these crazy places, like some kid with no network from Canada, because every VC was like, how did this kid from Canada get all these people paying him every month all this money? Like, I want to know more. And so that was my strength, is I was able to get massive enterprises to pay a pre-seed business monthly because it was a hair on fire problem for them.
Yeah, I love that.
And so it could be that your strength is your relationships. It could be that your strength is you're unbelievable at product. It could be your strength is you've got the perfect background to do this. It could be your strength is you're an unbelievable recruiter and you've added 4 PhDs from Carnegie Mellon or whatever it is. Or it could be that you are a PhD from Carnegie Mellon and you've got this unique, we've got a founder, she's got a tattoo of her PhD thesis, the core math from MIT. And I was like, that should be your first slide.
Yeah.
And she's like, why? I'm like, because you're a genius. So just start by being like, hey, I've got this unique technical solve that like my technical advisor was literally the head of MIT Media Labs. Like, start with that. I want to hear more about that. And so also I've noticed that that's what people are passionate about, is what they're great at. And like the best you will shine through. And VCs want to see the best you. So lead with the authentic story about why you're going to be great. And then it also, as a founder, it gets much easier because it's more natural.
Yeah,
It's
it's the
honest.
truth. And then I think you find better partners when you're telling the truth too, right? Or being authentic, and you find people that resonate with that story, and that just unlocks a lot more. Um, I think it's just a better relationship at the end of the day as well. Uh,
Yeah. 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 And then you'll find your
yeah.
people, which is the whole
hmm
ballgame.
Uh, you talked about competitive analysis a little bit in the sense of diligence from the investor side. On the founder side, we have this concept like reframe the competition slide. Any great examples of competition slides you've seen? I'm sure the market's like even more competitive than ever, right? Because it's like we just said, it's easy to spin up a new business today using Cursor or Lovable or whatever you might be using. What are how do you coach founders on the competition slide these days?
Yeah. So I mean, I'm stealing this from one of our investors, who's a brilliant founder, Nick Mehta from Gainsight. So thanks, Nick. But Nick used to always joke. He's like, I always see two kinds of competition slides. He's like, there's that weird graph where it's like you in the upper right corner, and then like the people you're actually worried about, a bunch of like legacy guys, and then like random filler. And the founder's always got his company in the top right with some like random arbitrary like axes
Yeah,
labeling and like he's like, I don't know what the hell to do with that, and I don't either. And the other one is like the feature matrix where it's like you and then like 17 green check marks and then like everyone else in like 8 red x's. none of that means anything to anyone, including you, founder. Like, and by the way, just so we're clear, I have made both of those
Yes.
slides for
Yes.
companies that I like. We all have, right? And so please don't feel attacked. No one in history has ever made a good competition slide. It's not possible because the idea that you're going to have some like matrix or checklist in software about features is just inherently wrong. What I want to hear is how are you solving this problem for people in a unique way? What is your vision or insight that is dramatically different, right? You know, Visible is a great example. Like your core insight, like this is relational. And yes, we need software tooling to build the relationships because managing relationships at this kind of scale is hard. You need a lot of outreach. Like our data says you need to talk to 75 funds. You're not going to keep that all in your head. You're not going to have a list like you guys have of 7,000 funds with everything they've ever done. Like no human can do that. You need a software tool. But that core insight is like a wildly advantageous insight that other people didn't have. And so what I want to hear is what is your core insight and how is that going to drive how you're going to do things, both in features and in how you're going to organize a business and which customers you're going to target and how you're going to target them. That is a sustainable advantage.
Yeah.
Everything else, you put a software feature that someone has, you know, you get the and I'm guilty of this because VCs are unoriginal, but like, why won't OpenAI do it? And it's like, well, OpenAI could do it. They have $40 billion and 180 PhDs running around.
Yeah. That's a
You need to have a way you're doing it that's
Yeah,
different.
absolutely. Uh, Kind of related to that, kind of last question here. We'll wrap up at least for the pitch deck part. Like, at the end of the day, what's like the one thing that pitch deck should make you feel as an investor? Like, what do you want to feel?
I want to finish reading that deck. So the way I use, and I say this as someone who's been out of the game for quite some time, but I think of fundraising very much, the closest analog is dating. So the pitch deck is very much like your online dating profile. The only purpose of a pitch deck is to get a meeting or a date. The purpose of a first date is to get a second date, ultimately culminating in marriage, right? So a marriage is an investment and they're on your board. So what I want to feel when I read a pitch deck is I believe that there is a venture scale opportunity here and I can't wait to meet Stacy. And if you make me be like, I need to meet Stacy and learn more, then you've actually succeeded because there is no pitch deck that I've ever seen in history. And you can go look and be like, here's Airbnb's first pitch deck. Here's Sam Altman's first OpenAI pitch deck. Sam used to run YC. If his first pitch deck, it's fine, but like there's no pitch deck that you're just going to look at and be like, take my money. It's all it's supposed to do is be like, I want to meet the person who wrote this and hear their story.
Love that. Uh, Kind of final question we're asking everyone this season. And you can cheat a little bit. I know it's gonna be hard, but like, what's one professional relationship that's gonna change the trajectory of your professional life?
Azure is going to.
Ooh, but we could let's do both if you have one in mind for each.
Sure. So I love shouting this out. So Greg from Hyde Park
Hmm?
Ventures was an investor of mine and was unbelievably founder focused. You know, one of the guys I would call whenever things, and he had such a little piece of the business. Always answered the phone and was very much my model for how to do this VC job in a way that I respect and admire. And I kind of have an internal like, what would Greg do when a founder calls me, which has been a guiding light. And to the extent that you know my founders say that I'm helpful, valuable, and a good partner, I owe a lot of that to him. Um, and in terms of relationships that you know will impact me moving forward, I'm really lucky to your point. Like Form has like 500 portcos now, and 800 founders. And so like I have this amazing experience of every morning I get to wake up and speak to someone brilliant working on something amazing who I can learn something from. And I catch myself in conversation all the time, like repeating them or paraphrasing them. And so it's this like learning at scale from these unbelievable, amazing people taking on the world every day. And Mike, you know exactly what I'm
Yeah,
talking about because you have the same experience. And that to me has been the opportunity of a lifetime. It's honestly quite humbling.
very awesome. Well, Jonah, I can, like I said, thank you for taking your time. Like I said, I quote lead with your strengths, probably at least like once a week. So thank you for that, and appreciate you spending time with us today here on the Thrive Through Connection podcast.
Awesome. Thanks so much for having me, Mike. Appreciate it as always.